On my mother's side, I'm of German ancestry. And so if you look at this photo in the upper right, these are the little boy is my grandfather, Hans Bestel, with his parents, my great grandparents. And this photo was taken in Germany in their greenhouse. And they immigrated to the US just before World War I. They established a greenhouse in Portland, Oregon. And so they raised plants for their livelihood. On my father's side, I'm of both Oglala Sioux and Kiowa ancestry. So these are my Sioux family, my grandmother, my grandmother and her and my great grandmother. And then on my Kiowa side, again, my father's side, um, these are my great great grandparents. And on the left is Spotted Wing, and she was a plant medicine person for the Kiowa people. So I have this plant background on both sides of my family, and I feel really blessed to be doing the work that I do for the tribe. And so you might wonder, how does turquoise play into this? And it just so happens that I used to spend all of my income buying jewelry made by other people, beautiful turquoise Indian jewelry. And one day a close friend of mine said, you know, if you learned how to make it, you could probably save a lot of money. So I took a silversmithing class at the local community college and I learned silversmithing. And our first project, we needed to have a stone to make into a piece of jewelry. So I went over to the Kingman turquoise mine for the first time. I've been living in Arizona for 18 years, but about 7 years ago was the first time I stopped in at the Kingman Turquoise mine. And I can honestly say I remember the first time I visited there because it was a life-changing experience. And I felt the beauty of the stones overcome me. And I really sensed that my life would be forever changed. And it has, because in addition to being very passionate about plants, I am also now very passionate about turquoise. I refer to it as a passion. Friends and family sometimes refer to it as an obsession. In any case, I love making turquoise jewelry. And so after I finished my silversmithing course, I enrolled in a lapidary course. And I've learned the art of cutting and polishing stones. And I combine my talents in those two endeavors with my hobby making jewelry. And then just again, drawing strength from my lineage and my background. I do have artists in my background. My uncle, the late T.C. Cannon, is was a well-known Kiowa contemporary artist. These are some of his paintings. Some of his work has shown at the Heard Museum and other locations throughout the country. And then also on my mother's side, I had the opportunity to travel to Germany for the first time a few years ago before COVID. And it turns out I have a great great grandfather named Ernst van Bondel, who also was an artist, and he, with a team of other artists, created this statue which pays homage to the Germanic warriors that drove back the Roman legions when they were invading Europe. And it was a very definitive battle because the Romans lost 1/6 of their army at this, and it was a turning point in their advance through Europe. So I'm just acknowledging my family background. And now I'm going to really delve into what we're here to talk about. So I'm going to start at the beginning, and that is how turquoise is formed. So turquoise is a hydrous phosphate of copper and aluminum formed as water percolates through cracks in the host rock, picking up trace minerals and depositing them into layers of blue to blue-green stone. So turquoise is actually found on all of 6 inhabited continents, and oftentimes in arid regions of the world. Usually it forms close to the surface. And anywhere where you get those minerals in combination, where you get phosphorus, copper, and aluminum, and you get water percolating through the system, it hydrates the phosphate. And in essence, if all those minerals are there together, it essentially precipitates into turquoise. Now, sometimes instead of aluminum, you get iron or sometimes zinc, and then you can get a more greener turquoise. The higher level of copper, you get a more blue turquoise. And if it can form in any type of host rock, so it can be metamorphic, sedimentary, fire formed, and it can form as a very thin surface crust, or it can form as a vein, or it can form as a small nugget or a large nugget. So anywhere there's gaps in the topography or the geology, it's an area where, as water percolates to the system, it is an area where turquoise can form into the host rock. And then this is actually what I think of as the most shocking part of the whole lecture. I'll just get it over right now. Of all the turquoise in the world, 90% of it is actually what's considered chalk, which means if you were to take it to the grinding wheels to make it into a gemstone, it would disintegrate. So only 10% of turquoise found on Earth is actually considered what's called gemstone grade quality, which means it's a 5 or a 6 on the Mohs scale of hardness. So that scale of hardness, a number 10 would be diamond, the hardest substance, and then a number 1 would be chalk, so it's like talc. And so turquoise is found somewhere in the middle. But most of the turquoise that's out there is like a 1, 2, or 3 on the Mohs scale, and only 10% of it is actually a 5 or a 6. And so you might wonder, well, how does that work? Well, in contemporary times, stabilization methods have been developed, and this began on an industrial level in the 1950s. And so when a rock is stabilized, it is man-altered to become hard enough to be used as a gemstone. So most of the turquoise that's available on the market has been stabilized, it's been man-altered, it's been soaked in a solution that helps harden it. Turquoise is incredibly porous, so, and I'll be going into the process of how stabilization works later. Another type of turquoise is called composite turquoise, and you can find this at the Kingman Turquoise Mine, where they've taken many small pieces of turquoise and they formed it into an aggregate block. And you can think of it as the difference between lumber versus particle board, whereas composite would be the particle board of turquoise. And so using compression and resin, they take the small pieces of turquoise and form them into a large piece, into a block. Also, reconstituted turquoise is essentially recycling the waste product of turquoise. So anytime you cut a stone or grind a stone, there's a waste product. It's the dust of the turquoise that the dust is settled by water. You always use water when you're cutting stones and working stones so that you don't inhale the fumes and so it doesn't heat up. And so if you were to evaporate all the water, you're just left with a crust of turquoise dust. If you took all that and glued it together, you could get reconstituted turquoise. So it's essentially recycled turquoise. It's a lower grade turquoise because it's leftover turquoise that has been mixed with glue. Dyed turquoise is, in some cases, in this obvious example, there's purple turquoise. That is something that the Kingman Mine has begun to market, and they call it Mojave purple. Purple turquoise does not exist in nature. It's a man-altered property. But sometimes people will take turquoise that's not that blue, and they'll enhance it by dyeing it. And so if you're not into wanting your turquoise tampered with, then you may not be wanting dyed turquoise. And then my least favorite is imposter turquoise, and this is also all over the market. And sometimes it can be a little challenging to tell. The greatest clue is the price point. And if it seems like too good of a deal, unfortunately, it probably is. So if it's too affordable, it's probably fake. And sometimes it's plastic. You can test if something is plastic by taking a hot needle to it. If it melts, then it's plastic. Sometimes howlite is a white stone that's dyed blue to resemble turquoise. Howlite has its own matrix, so sometimes the dye, the way the matrix of the howlite is, it resembles turquoise because it has a similar matrix. And so this can be harder to tell, but like for example, these are beads that have been drilled. So if you were to look at right through the hole of the bead with a light, and if you saw a bunch of white on the center, then that would be a clue that this has been dyed. Of course, if you had a lapidary saw, you could cut into a stone and see if it's white on the inside. I would caution you too, some turquoise does have a little bit of a white matrix. Turquoise is incredibly diverse and it comes in all different colors and hues. So if you see a little bit of white in your turquoise, that's not necessarily saying that it's fake. But if you cut into a stone and it's white on the inside, yes, that's fake. If you look at the drill hole on a bead and it's white on the inside only, then yes, that's fake. So a few tricks. There's also some lookalikes that are found in our region, veracite, chrysocolla, shattuckite. These are all formed as part of the copper family, and so they're sometimes found in similar veins as turquoise. And then I'm going to talk about turquoise throughout the ages. So the oldest known turquoise mines are found in Egypt in the Sinai Peninsula region. They date back to 6000 BC. In Egyptian culture, turquoise is believed to provide protection. It has an association with the goddess Hathor, who has been called the mistress of turquoise. This is a depiction of her wearing turquoise, and she's also the goddess of motherhood, dance, and turquoise. And And so turquoise has also been found in tombs and on burial objects, presumably to protect the deceased on their journey to the afterlife. So this is the sarcophagus of King Tutankhamun. Mostly you see gold and lapis, but there's also some turquoise mosaic there. In Chinese culture, the oldest known pieces of turquoise date back to the Shang dynasty. In Chinese culture, turquoise is believed to be symbolic of the circle of life. And if you've noticed in your own experience, turquoise can, in one's lifetime, change color. It interacts with the atmosphere. It undergoes oxidation. That oxidation can be sped up if you handle soap or lotion or skin oils. That can affect a stone's color. So oftentimes turquoise will turn from a blue to a green. And that idea that it can change throughout life is the parallel that is seen in Chinese belief system, that it serves as a metaphor for the way that we go through changes as we age and go through the many seasons in our lives. In Persia or present-day Iran, turquoise has been believed to have an association between heaven and earth. And for this reason, the ceilings and roofs of palaces and mosques have been adorned with turquoise. Also, they believe in their culture that it protects the wearer. And so some of the soldiers and warriors would wear turquoise. They would adorn their horse bridles with turquoise. Sometimes they would wear a turquoise stone in their turban, at the base of the turban, to prevent evil influence. They sometimes believe that the stone will change color to warn them of danger. And as you can see on this beautiful shamshir sword on the sheath, it's covered in turquoise mosaic. A lot of the Persian turquoise is known for its robin egg blue color with little to no matrix, so it was highly sought after for that reason. And this is a great example of a piece that has oxidized. So normally being known for this light robin egg blue, and you can see how old this piece is, how it's turned green over time. In Tibetan and Indian culture, turquoise was used on the crown of the first Tibetan king. It's been a gift to gods and by kings to high-level lamas. It's an important element of prayer beads. In southern Tibet, women wear turquoise in their hair with the belief that it protects their husbands. So I like to tease, if they're not wearing turquoise, are they upset at their husbands? Are they in the doghouse? In Europe, turquoise was brought over from Persia via Turkish traders. So it traveled along the Silk Road through the Turkish traders. And the name that we know today, turquoise, is actually the French word turquoise, which is turquoise stone, is what it translates to, or Turkish stone. And so when the French received it through trade networks, they thought it was coming from the Turks or from Turkey, but really the source, it was being sourced in Iran, and it was brought over through the middlemen traders. It was used in the Catholic Church on ornamentation. It's been important as an ornamental stone in secular jewelry after the 14th century, when the church had less of a stranglehold over the people, and the regular folks were also allowed to adorn themselves with turquoise. Moving closer to home in Mesoamerica, turquoise has been used both by Mayan and Aztec cultures. The name in the Aztec language is chalchiutl, and it's been valued in higher esteem than gold and emeralds. The Aztecs believed they learned the art of cutting and polishing stones from the god Quetzalcoatl. Chiefs wore it as a mark of distinction. It's been found in burials of important people. And so here's a few examples of Mayan and Aztec in beautiful mosaics. Some of these are mosaic masks. This is a double-headed serpent, and over 1,000 pieces of turquoise were adhered to a type of cedar wood that was shaped into the serpent. And this was actually believed to be worn as a pectoral on the chest. The back side shows the hollowed wood, and the back side was gilded with gold. And so some of these pieces like this and one of the masks, it's believed that some of these pieces were given as gifts to Cortez by Montezuma. Others may have been pillaged. They were taken over. They were brought over by the Spaniards to Europe, and some of them ended up being traded and passed along. And I believe one of these, it's thought that it made its way to Florence, Italy, and the artisans there weren't into that jewelry style, but they wanted all those turquoise mosaic pieces, so they completely gutted the pieces and remade their own jewelry with the pieces, which is unfortunate for the original piece, but they wanted to do their own craft. And then some of these can be found at the British Museum, and the vast majority can be found in Mexico, for example, in Mexico City at the Museum of Anthropology. And then this is a really interesting thing, and I forgot to bring my excerpt, but there's an article online that you can find if you Google Mayan gemstone dentistry. But essentially, the Mayan culture were expert dentists, and they were using a type of resin that actually was impervious to cavities to adhere the gemstones. And people of all walks of life, young and old, of all different economic backgrounds, were actually visiting the dentists back in Mayan times. And many of them were getting adorned with turquoise. And there's a very interesting article that talks about it that you can find online. And then in South America, the earliest known examples are from the Cupasnique culture and also the Sican culture of Peru. And so this is a pectoral that is conch shells inlaid with turquoise and chrysocolla beads. This is worn on the chest. And these are Sican knives, or these are ceremonial knives. And so they're meant not so much in a pragmatic sense, but in an adornment sense. And you can see the turquoise that has been used in combination with the gold. And then moving closer to home, I'm going to talk about the pre-contact tribal groups and then move into modern contemporary tribal groups. But the Hohokam, the Mogollon, the ancestral Puebloan that sometimes you hear referred to as Anasazi. So the Mogollon culture over there in southeastern Arizona, parts of Texas, parts of New Mexico, were known for being kind of more of a foraging culture. And then later, as time went on, from the 10th to the 12th century, they started having more agricultural features in the archaeology. They originally were living in pit houses. By the 11th century, they transitioned into surface pueblos, and by the 13th to 14th century, they were living in cliff dwellings. And some of the most noteworthy sites, archaeological sites that have turquoise, include the ceremonial cave outside of El Paso, Texas, that had this very beautiful turquoise bracelet. Also this pendant, which I believe there is an example of one at the Arizona State Museum that was from a Mogollon site. So if you haven't yet visited the exhibit, it would be a great place to view this. Also turquoise pendants. And then Hohokam culture, there in the Phoenix Valley, very well known for their agricultural traditions, well over 500 miles of irrigation canals, and extensive trade networks. And they worked with a lot of shell jewelry. So these armlets or bracelets are kind of a signature piece of Hohokam jewelry. These ones happen to have turquoise mosaic. And so they worked with no less than 62 different species of marine shell that they acquired from the Sea of Cortez and from the Pacific Ocean through trade and through travel. This is Snake Town ruins. It has since been covered up. It's located on one of the reservations down in the Phoenix area. This is where one of the oldest turquoise pendants on the continent is believed to have been found, at this ball court. And it was a turquoise pendant that dates back to around 600 to 700 AD. And then the ancestral Puebloan, also referred to as Anasazi, spanned the present-day Four Corners region. They lived in pit houses, grand pueblos, and cliff dwellings, and were a complex network of communities across the Colorado Plateau that held distinct knowledge of celestial sciences that found form in their architecture. The kiva, a congregational space that was used chiefly for ceremonial purposes, was an integral part of their community structure. And then I want to transition and talk about the modern day tribes too. The Santo Domingo, who actually, they refer to themselves as the Kewa, are very well known for their shell jewelry. And so you may have heard of the word he-she bead. So this is a necklace that's made from both turquoise and shell he-she beads. And so the word he-she in the Kewa language actually just means shell bead. But it's been come to known to be like a type of Santo Domingo jewelry. And you see it combined with turquoise oftentimes. And they're well known for their mosaic work and also just being amazing traders and amazing artisans. And so they would make trips down towards the Sea of Cortez, up onto the southern plains. They traded with all the tribal networks in their region and beyond, and amazing jewelry artisans. And so you can see they would acquire hundreds of pounds of shell fragments, all different shapes. And the first step would be to drill a hole. And so she's using a pump drill to manually drill a hole in that shell. And it's just a fragment. It could be any shape. And then she passes it along, and then he has strung them all, hundreds of them, and he's rolling them on this hard stone until they form circular And so that's how beads were manufactured in days gone by. And there are still artisans that take the time to make it in this way, although much of the Hishi bead that is available is coming from the Philippines and other regions where it's mass produced today. And then over there on the Hopi Mesas, very well known for their silver overlay work, which came later, but originally using shell, cottonwood, seeds, and turquoise. And I want to draw your attention to these beautiful earrings because there's a story within. And you may have seen some of these noteworthy photographs, and where the maidens are wearing these earrings. And so the center is abalone, and surrounding it is turquoise mosaic. And there's actually an allusion there to water using the abalone, which would be very important in a culture that is not relying on irrigation agriculture for their crops. And then the blue surrounding it is reminiscent of a storehouse, a storeroom full of blue corn. And so combining those themes, water and blue corn, is showing abundance, and it's representing it through your jewelry. And then in Zuni culture, this is quite interesting. You know, there's about 10,000 enrolled Zuni members, and of that tribal base, about 80% are involved economically in the arts in some capacity. And then of that 80%, 65% specifically making jewelry. So this is the community of artisans. They're very well known for their silversmithing, their petite point, their fetish necklaces, and their inlay. And then Navajo also worked with the seed jewelry, making with the ghost beads from the juniper seeds. And in their belief system too, turquoise provides protection. And so sometimes they would place a basket full of turquoise at the eastern doorway to the hogan to protect the family. And then also in the oral traditions, there's changing woman is a prominent, I guess, cultural hero in the Navajo tradition, for lack of a better word. And she was known to reside in a home in the west of turquoise. And so when the young women go through their coming of age ceremony, they adorn themselves in turquoise as a way to pay homage to changing woman. And then too, just in our southwestern region, in mainstream contemporary culture, you see everybody loves to wear turquoise. It doesn't matter what your background is. And I like to draw attention to this because I think we really live in a wonderful region of the world where everybody embraces the beauty of turquoise. And if you think about other areas in Indian country, you don't really see, other than tribal people, you don't see people wearing beadwork or wearing the styles of those regions. It's just the native people that wear it. In the Great Plains, you have the geometric beadwork. In the Midwest, Great Lakes area, you have floral beadwork. Down in Florida, you have a lot of beautiful applique skirts made from cloth. And but you only see the tribal people wearing those adornments. But here in the Southwest, turquoise has really crossed all cultural boundaries, and everybody loves and embraces turquoise. I want to talk a little bit about turquoise in the pre-contact Southwest. Just as one example, the Santo Domingo developed ceremonial jewelry for their own use. Made from large shells, usually reddish spiny oyster shells acquired by trading with other tribes, the pendants bore geometric mosaic patterns formed from small pieces of turquoise, jet, and shell. Although they were originally made for use in the Pueblo's traditional corn dance, similar pendants are made for sale. So sometimes certain jewelry will be made just especially for ceremonial purposes and worn at that time. And it's no different than what you could equate with just mainstream culture. Sometimes on Sunday, people wear their Sunday best when they go to church, and other days they just dress regular. And so among Indian cultures, there's days that you wear your regular jewelry, your regular turquoise, your everyday turquoise, and then there's certain pieces that are reserved for special occasions. And then this example is this pendant that they were referring to for the corn dance. And then in modern times, some of these pieces have become popularized. They're available on the market in a secular setting, but they also have a ceremonial context. And then pre-contact mining. These are some of the more noteworthy mines, but this map is by no means exhaustive at all. And so the methods that for extracting turquoise, the technologies involved, oftentimes turquoise is found semi-close to the surface, and so you could use stone mauls and antlers. I talked about using the pump drill to drill the holes and shaping the beads. But I guess one example of a mine that goes deep is the Cerrillos mine, and it's probably the most well-known mine in the Southwest, not far from Santa Fe. And that mine was, at the time of contact, was found to be a depth of 200 feet. And so the tribal groups of the region had taken these very long ponderosa pine timber, and they had cut ladder pieces into the timber so they could get down into the mine. But oftentimes turquoise is found closer to the surface. And I've often wondered about stabilization, and were pre-contact cultures, not just in the US, places all over the world, were people trying to stabilize turquoise if so much of it was found in a chalky state? And I'm always looking for the smoking gun that can answer this question. And so this is something that just kind of hints at it, and it in no way says anything about stabilization, but it talks about how the Apaches would come up onto the southern plains, they would hunt bison, and then they would trade the meat and the hide and the tallow to the Pueblo tribes in exchange for corn, turquoise, and textiles. And so I was wondering, well, that tallow that the Pueblos were getting from the Apaches, were they using that to enhance the stone? And I came across this reference. Indians making strands of beads learned ages ago that by placing their pieces of turquoise in boiling tallow, or sheep fat in the case of Navajo, for a couple hours, the stone became easier to drill, grind, and polish with less waste. So is tallow an effective stabilization method? In days before modern chemicals, maybe it was, and turquoise is extremely porous, and so it will take up whatever you absorb it in. And so tallow may have had a binding capacity to help hold the stone together. And then turquoise and ancient trade routes. So this map shows a few more of those mines. And granted, there's close to 200 different turquoise deposits throughout the Southwest, and the vast majority of all of them had evidence of tribal use. They knew where these areas were, and we know this because the tribal people have shared this, and because there's artifacts that are found there that suggest this. And then there's many trade. This is just a map that shows the major trade epicenters like Chaco Canyon, and then some of the secondary, tertiary trade centers. And so turquoise has actually been found. It's been traded as far north as Canada, as far east as Arkansas and Mississippi, and of course it's all the way to the west and spans the whole North and South American continent. And a little bit more on the tradability of turquoise. I want to talk about an example with Zuni. As early as 600 to 900 AD, ancestors of the present-day Zunis carried bison hides and turquoise to the Pacific coast to exchange for shell, coral, and seawater, a practice that continued well into the 19th century. In 1886, while leading the Hemingway Southwestern Archaeological Expedition, Frank Hamilton Cushing met an elderly Zuni named Kwampasumi, who made with 2 or 3 companions a burro journey on foot to the Pacific for the purpose of collecting shells and sacred water there. And then I just kind of want to go through a historical timeline here. And so what was happening in our region of the world, and as it relates to turquoise. And so the Spanish came in and established colonial rule in 1598 with Juan de Oñate, and they began to really subjugate the Puebloan people into a form of indentured servitude. So it was just kind of one step up above slavery. And so the people were forced to do labors for the Spanish, mine for them, grow crops for them, and then came under their religious domination. And so the tribal people, after a number of years, had enough of this. In 1680, the Pueblo Revolt happened, which is actually the first American Revolution. And this happened in 1680. And the way it all came about was Popé from San Juan Pueblo. He realized they needed to be able to communicate with one another across the whole Puebloan region. And so some of the Pueblo tribes, they speak different languages. So he sent out runners in all directions, and they had a deer hide with a bunch of knots in it. And they were instructed by the runners to untie a knot each day until no knots remained. And on the final day, when no knots were there, that was the day they would overthrow the Spanish. And they were successful in doing that. And the Spanish fled from their capital of Santa Fe, and they fled to El Paso. And then they were gone, banished. And so it was a successful revolution of a foreign entity. And then later the Spanish came back, and then more of these same issues. And then moving forward in time into the 1850s, we have other colonial influences coming from the east. You have the railroad route that cuts through this region. And then in the 1870s, especially with the General Mining Act of 1872, you have an influx of early settlers and colonial influence through mining. And so they began to take up the mines that the tribal people had once had in their possession. And also around this time, since you have the railroad coming through in the late 1800s, early 1900s, all of a sudden turquoise was gaining popularity back east. It was this unique thing coming from the Southwest, and so it became popular, and tourism trade out west began to be a hot commodity. And so just talking about people being dispossessed from their access to the turquoise mine, this is just one example. In 1910, there were four Cochiti tribal members that wanted to access one of the mines that had been purchased and was out, and they ended up getting found out by the, I guess, the law at the time, and so they were incarcerated for that. And so you have a lot of policies and laws and just colonial influences that really dispossess people from access to the areas they once had. And so I'm going to switch gears and talk about some of the turquoise mines. This is a great map because it shows a great degree of them. I'm only going to cover probably just a tenth of what's on this map, but I'm going to cover some of the more noteworthy ones. The most well-known one is the Cerrillos mine. It formed at the base of a volcano, and it's likely the oldest turquoise mine in North America that was being used by people. It was mostly accessed by the San Marcos and Santo Domingo tribal people. And because it formed at the base of a volcano, the volcanic tuff interacted with all the minerals, and it created this really wide diversity of colors. And then the Morenci mine was located in southeastern Arizona. It was mostly a metal mine, but there was also turquoise. It's known for the fool's gold or the iron pyrite that resembles silver. Also, you have probably heard of the term spiderweb turquoise, and that's when you get a black webbing and then turquoise surrounding it. Well, bird's eye or water web is even a more rare type of turquoise, and it's where the matrix is a dark blue, and then the surrounding turquoise is a lighter blue. So this bird's eye or water web, it's very similar to spiderweb turquoise, but different color matrix and very rare. And then number 8, Nevada. This is one of my favorites because it has so many beautiful earth tone matrix. But it's a mine located in Carlin, Nevada that began in 1929. It's no longer in operation. It produced some of the very largest turquoise nuggets in its heyday. It's known for its deep blue to bluish green colors and black to golden brown matrix. And it's some of the most highly collected turquoise in the world. And then Royston turquoise is a mine in Nevada with 4 different districts near Tonopah. It's known for different colors of green and the light brown matrix. It's more of a 5 or a 6 on the Mohs scale, meaning being a 5, it's a little bit softer, and this is one of the more prolific mines. Sleeping Beauty turquoise. This mine closed over a decade ago. It's near Globe, Arizona. It's known for the light robin egg blue with little to no matrix, and it's favored in Zuni jewelry for this reason, because when you're working with petite point style jewelry where you are using concentric circles of turquoise, it's better if there's not a matrix because it detracts from the symmetry of the piece. So having that blue with no other matrix makes it favored. And it was one of the largest North American mines of turquoise. And then Bisbee Blue was one of the first on the market. It was initially part of the Copper Queen mine, so they were after copper. And the lavender pit, it turned out to have turquoise. And so the men would go into the mines. They had their big, huge lunch boxes. And I guess taking anything from the mine is a no-no, but it turns out that they smuggled some of the turquoise in their lunch boxes, and we're so grateful that they did, because then it became known by the rest of the world. And only less than 2,000 pounds of high-grade turquoise was ever recovered. Much of it ended up in waste tailings, and it was owned by the Phelps Dodge. And then Caracal Lake turquoise. This is named for a mine located on a dry lake bed in a high, cool area of Lander County, Nevada, near Battle Mountain. It's most famous for its lime green frostite due to the high zinc content. So zinc has replaced the aluminum in this type of turquoise, and it has that almost gaspiite looking neon green color. And the other types of turquoise that formed here was a lighter green with some light brown matrix. And because this turquoise formed on a dry lake bed, there was all these leftover clam shells that were just there from when there had been water. And much like the process that happens as wood becomes petrified and turns into rock, the same thing happened with these shells, and it created these rare pseudomorph clams filled with turquoise. So just extremely rare, extremely unique, such an interesting formation. And I did run across one of these one time in Sedona. There was a turquoise dealer that had one on his table. I did get to touch it. I got to hold it. I got to look at it. It was $8,000. I'm waiting to win the lottery till I get my own Caracal Lake fossil. And then this one, I'm going to kind of share a little bit, and then I'm going to possibly retract some of what I say, but I want you to listen to it because it's interesting. So it's believed that tribal people mined this for over 1,000 years, and contemporary mining began in the 1880s. The mine was part of a boom around 1000 AD when mining culture was needing a great supply of turquoise. It's one of the oldest producing mines in the U.S., and it's been one of the greatest suppliers of turquoise to the Southwest and the jewelry industry. And it's known for blue with some black matrix and every shade under the sun. But this interesting thing, saying that, oh, it's been used for 1,000 years and it was traded down into Mayan culture when they were needing a great supply of this. Well, how on earth do they know that? We weren't here 1,000 years ago. Well, some of the early archaeologists had a theory that, there's not really very many turquoise mines in Mesoamerica. Where were they getting the turquoise? They must have been getting it from the Southwest. And so some early archaeologists did some research. They were testing some of the substrates on the archaeological pieces and trying to trace what mines they came from. And they found evidence that it was coming from the Southwest. And so that's a pretty interesting story. And it makes for just really like, wow, that's so interesting. And then I happened to listen to the lecture that kicked off the opening of the Arizona State Museum turquoise exhibit. And I can't remember the gal's name. I know Diane knows who she is, but she gave a lecture that actually refuted that original thought. And so she was examining strontium isotopes, and she was doing similar research, but her data was a little more modern technology, a little more precision. And she actually found that there wasn't necessarily evidence that that was the case. So as time goes on, new methods are revealed. We learn more and more. And so again, do we know where turquoise was being sourced in Mesoamerica? Well, we don't necessarily know the answer because it's a little bit of a quandary because there's not a lot of turquoise mines down there. They originally thought it must be coming from the Southwest, but then where is the evidence to show that? And it's constantly being revealed and understood and learned about in new ways. So I'm going to talk about the behind the scenes happenings at the Kingman Turquoise Mine. So the first process that they do with the chalky turquoise is they stabilize it. So this is the stabilization room. They keep it at a hot temperature and keep it very aerated with the fan so that all the moisture will be taken out of the chalky turquoise. If there's any moisture there, they want it out so that it can then be placed in these canisters that have the stabilization solution. Then it soaks in the solution for several weeks, then it comes out of the solution, and then it cures for several weeks. And then it's ready to be cut on your lapidary saw, slabbed, and then eventually cabbed into cabochons. And some people like to back their cabochons to make them more have more strength. This is some of the equipment used in making the composite block turquoise. And then I'm going to switch gears, talk about pre and post contact jewelry styles. And the way that I distinguish between pre and post contact is whether or not silver is used, because silver was part of the post contact era with the Spanish influence. And so I just want to say, even though metalsmithing wasn't happening in the Southwest region, it is no stranger to the Americas because tribal groups all across both continents were actually doing metal work. The Tlingit were cold hammering copper, making these beautiful daggers and ladles, very ornate pieces. Of course, the Mississippi Mound culture, known for their beautiful ornate copper plates. And then the Sican culture of Peru, and many other examples in South America where they were doing all forms of metallurgy, including alloying and smelting metals. But in the Southwest, it was not part of what was known to the region. And so the first documented known use of silversmithing was from a Navajo tribal member named Astidisani, who learned it from some Spanish in the 1850s. And there's no photo of Astidisani, and this is a photo of his nephew, Slender Maker of Silver. So this is used to represent him. So Astidisani was making his way back from the long walk after everything happened with the Navajo. They were displaced from their land, everything that happened with Kit Carson. And so he was making his way back, and he landed at Zuni, and he was trying to establish himself there. And so he began doing the silversmithing that he had learned, and he was secretive about his trade because he didn't want anybody to steal his ideas. But then he was befriended by Laniadi, a Zuni tribal member, and they exchanged. Laniadi gave him some cattle, and in exchange, a city Sani taught him silversmithing, and they became friends. And then the craft of silversmithing spread from Navajo to Zuni, and then later Laniadi brought it to Hopi. Silver working was introduced to the Hopi around 1890 when the Zuni smith Laniadi began to trade some of his silver jewelry among the Hopi. He taught Hopi tribal member Sikyatala silversmithing, apparently in return for hand-woven native cotton textiles. So that was the chain of events, and of course there were other interactions with tribal people and Spanish and Mexican blacksmiths and silversmiths. And so this is the period from 1850 on is when the period of silversmithing began to spread among the Southwest tribal groups. And then you get turquoise being used in settings with silver. You see coin silver being used for beads. And so originally that's what tribal people had access to, was just coin currency, silver currency. And of course, I guess it's a no-no by the US government. You're not supposed to burn up your currency. So that was brought to the attention of the area. And so eventually Indian traders, and when I say Indian traders, I'm talking about non-Indian people that established trading posts on the reservation. They began to bring in sheet silver so the tribal people could make their jewelry and they didn't have to melt down the coin silver. And then there's different forms of silversmithing, sand casting and tufa casting. So sand casting is where you have sand that has a high clay content. You can take an original piece of jewelry, you can impress it into the sand, it'll hold the mold. You take the original piece out, you pour on hot silver, and you get a duplicate piece. Tufa casting is where you carve into volcanic ash rock, and you get an original piece of jewelry, and then you can do several casting pours before it's no longer usable. And so I want to talk about turquoise that's been excavated from some of the various archaeological sites, because it really is the source of information for the old style jewelry. And I'll share a little bit about that. The knowledge we have of pre-contact jewelry generally comes from excavations. Over the years, archaeologists have found more than 200,000 turquoise pieces at various sites in just Chaco Canyon alone. The gems, which were often embedded into jewelry and figurines, were very important to Puebloan culture and akin to modern-day diamonds. The largest quantity of turquoise found at any single space was Pueblo Bonito, a Chaco Canyon great house. One interior room, believed to be used for burials of important people, contained 56,000 pieces of turquoise. Included within was 6 carved turquoise birds and a jet frog with inlaid turquoise eyes. There was a small basket with turquoise mosaic that was also found, containing 1,214 pieces of mosaic. And within the basket and the nearby area, they discovered 2,150 disc-shaped turquoise beads and 174 turquoise pendants. And so I'm going to go through some examples of some of the pre-contact style beads, and then the contemporary early pendants, and then later being combined with silver. And then some of the older style necklaces combining turquoise with tab beads, combining it with shell and coral. And then the contemporary beads. And then various types of bracelets. This is such an interesting piece because it's essentially a basketry material that has been woven into a bracelet, lacquered with piñon pitch to adhere the turquoise mosaic. And then you have the hohokam, shell turquoise bracelets, and then contemporary combining with silver. Some bracelet models, different types of earrings, the slab earrings and the mosaic earrings. And then, so a keto or a bogard, keto is the word in Navajo that translates to bogard. And so in days gone by, people actually needed a bogard for a really pragmatic purpose. Any of you that are involved in archery know that when you pull back the bowstring, there's a good chance that the string can slap your wrist. And so you want to protect yourself from that. And so early bogards were made with leather, rawhide, bone. Later, you see the use of silver combined with leather. This individual has 2 bogards, so he is likely an ambidextrous hunter. You see pins being used in Zuni jewelry, collar tips, oftentimes in Navajo style. Bolos, this is a more contemporary design coming from around the 1950s. I believe a precursor to the bolo may have been the tie slide. The name is actually, we say bolo, but it's in Spanish it's bola, and the bola is a primitive hunting weapon that was used by many tribal groups in South America. The bola is most well known as being used by South American cowboys known as gauchos for wrapping the legs of runaway cattle when thrown from the back of a horse. And if you look closely, you see how this resembles the bolo tips on a bolo or a bola. Another idea about the bolo, in Wickenburg, Arizona, silversmith Victor Cedarstaff claimed to have invented the bolo in 1949. A gust of wind blew off his hat while he was riding one day. He retrieved the silver-trimmed hatband and tossed it around his neck. Cedarstaff patented the invention later in 1954. And then also buckles. This is actually the Lone Ranger in his later years at a rodeo, wearing a turquoise buckle. Conchos. And so when we hear about conchos, we mostly hear about Navajo silver conchos, and we hear about the first phase concho and the second phase concho. But I just want to draw attention to the fact that there's a much more ancient tradition of conchos in the Southwest. And so this is a graduated concho belt that was excavated from a Fremont site in southern Utah, and it was made actually from gilsonite, and it was lashed together with yucca fiber. And so there is a much longer history of conchos in our region, but it for some reason hasn't gotten a lot of attention. So mostly we hear about silversmithing and Navajo concho belts because that became very popularized. But again, this is part of a deeper history. This is more evidence that suggests that conchos were prevalent. And so this is also from the Fremont culture, and these are some clay figurines that have been excavated, and it does look as though that they are possibly wearing concho belts. This could be a stretch, I'll let you decide, but doesn't this rock art appear to be having something around the waist? Could it be a concho belt? And then also too, the Plains influence. The Southern Plains had a lot of interaction with the Pueblo groups. Sometimes it was good through trade, sometimes it was raid, but whatever the case may be, they were interacting. And a lot of times they were worn in Plains culture as a drop, which just means it was worn vertically. Sometimes it's called a concha because sometimes it was used shell, and then later metal, or sometimes it's referred to as a hairpin or a drop. Also, it's used both men and women. And so in Kiowa tradition, we wear the Southern Plains concho belts with a horizontal belt and a vertical drop. And I know this because my own tribal regalia lends testimony to this. And since you all are tuning in from Tucson, I'll give you a shout out. This is my aunt, Alice Sedongier. She works at the Mission Gardens. She used to work at the American Indian Language Development Institute. But there we are in our Kiowa regalia wearing the Plains style concho belts. And then this gets back to what you normally hear about the history of concho belts. And so the first phase concho belt spans from 1860 to 1880. And this is the period of time when tribal people had not acquired the art of soldering. And so in order to affix the concho to something, they had to cut a diamond shape in the concho. And then there's a metal slit here. And so a horse rein is the belt, and it's lashed through. And so the buckle is essentially on the front. Later, the second phase concho belts, soldering is taking place. And so the buckle part is on the back side of the concho, and then you get the leather on the back. And then, of course, turquoise being combined with silver. This is a great photo. This just proves that every member of the family should have a concho belt. You see turquoise being used in horse adornments. Some of this is Spanish influence. I'll talk a little bit about some design styles. And so there's the tabular necklaces. On the left is the older style, and this is a more contemporary piece. This is actually from the Millicent Rogers Museum. So I'll be interested to tune into that lecture later on this season. And then turquoise being used in mosaic. Different styles of inlay, just regular standard inlay, chip inlay, channel inlay, cluster work, and this is similar to the petite point. So petite point is teardrop shape, needle point is elongated pieces of turquoise. Overlay, this is a style that originated among the Hopi, and it has since spread beyond to many different tribal groups that like to do overlay jewelry, but it's actually two pieces of silver. There's a top piece and a bottom piece. And so the top piece, the artisan would take a jeweler's saw and they would cut out a beautiful design, sometimes getting inspiration from rock art or basketry designs. And then the bottom piece has no design. And you take the two pieces of silver and you sweat solder them together and they become one piece. You file the edge so that you don't ever know that it was once two pieces. It looks like one piece. And then you shape it into the jewelry, the desired jewelry. And then you can oxidize the piece so that the darker part is revealed, and then you high polish the top side to get that two-toned effect. And then design motifs. I love this photo, and it always makes me think of that saying that they say less is more. And in the case of Indian jewelry, less is not more, more is more. And so I love this photo because it brings me inspiration on how to dress in the morning. And so the jacala, you may have heard of this word, and actually the translation of jacala literally means earrings in Navajo. And so she's wearing earrings, she's wearing jacalas. And what would happen as the day grows long, and I know all the women in the room know this, your ears start to kind of stretch and you feel like taking off your long, heavy earrings. And so they would take them off and they would throw them over their existing necklace. And it ended up turning into a really nice looking design piece. And so it ended up becoming a design motif in necklaces worn by men and women, which just came out of a pragmatic need to lighten your load on your ears. And then the Naja, this is the crescent moon symbol. And so the story, as the story goes, they say that the tribal people got this from the Spanish when they saw, you know, their horse headstalls with these crescent moons. Where did the Spanish get it? They got it from the Moors. Where did the Moors get it? So the Moors were from North Africa. They were the Berber tribes south of Morocco and Mauritania. They were invaded by Arabic cultures that have the crescent moon and the star as their symbol. So there's a long chain of events. And so when you hear about the squash blossom and the Naja, the story usually says, oh, the Navajo, they got it from the Spanish. I would like to present an alternative narrative to that. And here's some evidence. The crescent symbol in association with Zuni pictograph sun watching stations. So the morning star, which is here, the sacred hand, the face of the sun, and the new moon petroglyph symbols mark specific sites for viewing the morning horizon for tracking a sunrise calendar. So this is in Zuni culture, but many Pueblo cultures also had sunrising stations, and they demarked them with rock writing to know exactly where they are. And being able to, agricultural societies, of course, need to be able to know what's happening with the seasons and the sun. And so they would find a clear line of vision. And then off in the distance, there would be a mesa with a very flat surface. And so they could track the sun. They could find out what's happening each day. And these were denoted by these symbols. So all I'm saying is the crescent moon symbol has been around in Indian cultures in the Southwest, long predating the Spanish influence. And so when you see a squash blossom, is it a direct result of the Spanish influence? Maybe it is, or maybe this symbol was already around, and then when they acquired silver, they began to put it into silver jewelry. And so also this, again, the story happens again, same thing. It's, we know this as the squash blossom. It's referred to as a squash blossom. That's what we have in the Southwest. We have agriculture and we have squash blossoms. But they say, the story goes, oh, no, they got the idea from the Spanish, and it was the pomegranate. They saw the Spanish soldiers, they were wearing buttons, and there were pomegranates on the buttons, and that's where they got the design idea. Well, I like to present multiple options, so you can decide for yourself. Here is a pomegranate, here is a squash blossom. They look very similar. In any case, this is what you hear. Some say that the Navajo created the squash blossom after seeing the pomegranate design frequently used as decoration by the Spanish people, including on the buttons of soldiers' uniforms. In parts of Spain, the pomegranate is a revered fruit, in particular as a heraldic symbol of the city of Granada, which is also the Spanish word for fruit known in English as pomegranate. And Diane, I look like I'm like up on my time, so should I speak to the end?
Yeah, if you want to maybe wrap it up, because I just want to make sure that there's opportunities for people to ask questions, but this has been fascinating.
Yeah, you know, I'm pretty close to being done, so I'm gonna bump ahead here. I'm sorry, folks, for missing out on some content, but in closing, let me just share some closing thoughts. And I'm sorry that I wasn't able to get to everything, but I covered the most of it. In closing, I'd just like to share that adornments have always held a special place in the soul of humankind. From the beginning of time, people have been fascinated with decorating themselves with beautiful things. Turquoise, in particular, has held a special significance in cultures around the world. Turquoise has long been used in spiritual rituals and has been found in burial sites worldwide, from the tombs of the Egyptian pharaohs, the Shahs of Persia, to American Indian chiefs and medicine men. I hope this presentation has shed light on the ways in which turquoise seems to touch the human spirit. And with that, thank you. I think Diane's going to field some questions. Thank you for tuning in.